Thank you so much. And it's a great pleasure to be here. And I'm really thankful that I was invited to talk to everyone. Because it's wonderful because my underlying background is in 3D, but I became really interested in hands about 5 years ago because the people not hear me on Zoom.
Devices.
Okay. Cool. Does that work better? All right. I'm used to teaching on Zoom, so I can read the chat and read the room and look at my slides all at the same time. So if that's not better, let me know on Zoom. So, and hello to the people on Zoom. All right, so it's wonderful to be here because I like talking about hands. The reason why I'm super interested in hands is I think they're the key to understanding the physical world that we live in. Okay, so I've been interested in the very basic sort of end goal for a lot of my projects has been basically understand the physical world so that you could ask for really, really basic questions, the type of questions that you can answer, a 2-year-old can answer, and say, well, how would I, for example, open the cabinet over here? And so you can imagine, even though you've never been here, the danger of giving lots of talks is sometimes people have seen the same example, but many of you, I hope, have not seen this example. So you have a scene that you probably have never been to. I've never been here, at least. And you can say, okay, well, what can we do in this scene? Well, we can go open the cabinet. And if I go and try to open the cabinet, well, how do I open this door that way? And my goal of my research for the past decade or so has been basically developing a human or better understanding of the physical world from human data. And I started out being really interested in this from a 3D angle, but I realized that basically no one really cares about a static point cloud. Like that's not interesting. Like it's useful for some things, but if I give you a static point cloud, that doesn't really mean I understand the world. The world is interesting because of the things you can do in it, and you can think about the many possibilities of what you can do. And you can imagine that if you watch little kids, they go around and they open everything, they throw things on the floor, they do all sorts of stuff. The sort of possibilities are endless. And they have this ability to understand stuff. And we have this ability to understand the world as a physical place where you can go and interact stuff. And my long-term goal for now, actually, my first paper on this was probably 10 years ago, was I wanted to learn by watching people do stuff. Now, 10 years ago, and sort of my ID card is falling on my wallet, you can see my birth date on this, we couldn't understand anything. So actually post-detection, no, not so good. In fact, for one of our systems, we actually did object detection. And we'd love to be able to understand it, but you watch people open things. This has been a goal. And back when I started, this was something where we really couldn't actually get much other than kind of, is a person sitting, is a person standing? And that's kind of basically it. And things didn't work. But this is a way that people learn the world. And if you know from children, even if they can't manipulate an object, they often understand how you would manipulate it. And I like to give computer systems you watch how people interact with the world, and from there we should be able to figure out how you interact. Now, of course, human hands, if you could find a human hand and put it on a robot, you would be a billionaire. Like, human hands are amazing. But you can learn about a lot of the state of the world by simply watching the human demonstrations. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about my sort of 2 directions in this. The first thing is frankly understanding interaction. So if I watch this video of the man opening the dishwasher to show you the apartment that you could possibly live in, well, I'd like to be able to understand what he's doing with his hands. And this is actually quite challenging because I'd like to be able to do this even if I don't have a reliable setup where I know exactly where the person's hands are. I'd like to be able to do this even if I have an instrument to the space. So I want to be able to do this reliably. The other thing is I want to be able to go from understanding interaction to sort of learning interaction. So if I rewind this video before the man interacts with the object, I should be able to learn a mapping from basically the input image of what I could do. So yes, it's useful to understand what people are doing, but ultimately what I think we want from our systems is to be able to understand what people could do. And so this is the sort of the goal. Okay. So I've been doing this for quite a while, and so the first sort of way I got started in the community was to build this data set and method called 100 Days of Hands. And the idea was, I see, there's still a resolving issue with the echo. Well, let me just start with people in the audience. Let me see if there's something I can. Does this work? Does this have less echo? Can you still, okay, it's better? Okay, good. Okay, let's try that. All right, wonderful. So the way I got started on this was we built this data set of people interacting with objects. And the idea was that we just want to have really, 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 really basic understanding. And we built this system, and it really doesn't do much. It tells you the hands, it tells you left versus right, and it tells you the object they're holding. And by telling you the object you're holding, this is basically, it's able to produce a bounding box, and here we're showing it in orange around the object it's holding. This is really, really basic. And in some sense, you might say, well, who cares? Like, that's interesting. You could train a system. And actually, the reviewers were thinking that as well. But after this paper got in and was out, people ended up using this basic information for lots of things. So people use it for video understanding. They use it for example, recognizing what objects people are holding. Because if you know what objects people are holding, this is a good cue for what they're doing. And I think the thing that I was most excited about was, it's great if it has impact in the computer vision community. I love the computer vision community, but it also had impact in other spaces. So we found people use this for robotics. They need a system that just finds hands and just knows where they are. And having a system that just kind of works is very, very helpful. And then people use it for understanding, for example, helping people. Like if you are, I want to know where did you last put your keys, which is very, very frustrating if you don't know where it is. Well, if you can rewind, you can actually find where you last touched your keys, because you can keep track of all the objects you've held. And then people also use this for things like stroke rehabilitation. So you want to know how well people are recovering from a stroke. And so knowing where you're holding, what objects you're holding, and just being able to keep track of your hands is very helpful. So we've been working on this, and I want to show you the next version of this system, which essentially provides new information. And so this is a work which is done by a cast of my students, some of whom are visiting from other universities. And this is going to appear at NeurIPS. And the motivation for this is basically we were able to get past information that was kind of okay. So we kind of knew that if we had a scene where a person is manipulating this pot, well, so far our system that we had developed enables you to understand it's a right hand, it's kind of in contact with an object, and we know what the object is. But in some sense, this is really not a good understanding, because first off, we don't know the extent of the hands, we don't know the extent of the object. So we have a box, and boxes aren't really great. And then the fact of the matter is that the person isn't really using just the contact. That's interesting is not that they're holding the spoon here. They're holding a spoon to do something else. And so all the systems we had built didn't have this information. So we developed a system where we could get other information. And so we want to have richer information. And the idea is here, it's complementary to all of the great work. You can see many works on doing hands in 3D. And this work in 2D is complementary in the sense that our hope is you can take our systems, and this will give you useful cues and useful information for developing better 3D systems, or it'll help you take your 3D systems and make them more robust. So we had a system which could generate segments, and we either, you could either do SAM, as everyone is using, or we also, one of the students spent about 6 months trying to develop something like SAM, and then SAM came out and it was very sad. And sort of one afternoon, another student was able to get much better results. But she worked really, really hard on this. And she did really good results, and it's really sad that didn't make the paper. We can also get information about grasps, and I know that saying anything about grasps is opening a can of worms, because if you have 5 people in a room, there are at least 10 different grasp categorizations you could have, including, for example, don't categorize grasps. But we developed a very, very basic system by just simply trimming an existing taxonomy. And you can do things like power versus precision, prismatic versus circular, and of course, non-prehensile grasps, which are extremely important. So actually, the reality is when people are mainly manipulating objects, they're often not doing these traditional force closure grasps. So you can get that information. And we also have sort of fine-grained information or estimates of it, where we know the difference between tools and containers, and we can estimate the difference between touching an object, holding an object, and using an object. Because if I put my hand on the counter, I'm not actually holding that object. I'm just making contact. And our earlier systems couldn't quite do this. And last but not least, you can imagine that you can then take the object and you can treat it just like a hand, because tools are essentially extensions of the hands. And from there, we can get second objects. And these are objects that are being interacted with by tools. And by having this information and having it for multiple hands, you get a much richer understanding, where you know that there's one hand which is holding a tool, which is going to an object, and the other hand is also holding that object. And so you can get these interesting interactions and manipulations. And so this is the hope. Now, the one thing I always want to say, because in computer vision these days, basically you say X is all you need, everything is solved, everything works. This is, I think, a first stab in the general direction. And there are lots of ways to improve on the systems I'm showing. There are lots of ways to improve on the data set I'm showing. And my hope here is that this is a first stab, and this inspires some other directions as well. And people should try our systems out and tell us when they work and when they don't work. We love hearing when things failure modes. Sometimes people send them, and they're often very interesting. So we have a new data set to power this, and the data set sort of contains a bunch of different informations. And the data sets there's sort of 3 of them, which are sort of third-person data. And so these are things like, for example, there's an interactions data set, which one of my other students gathered, which primarily has very few tools. It's mainly people interacting with articulatable objects like refrigerators and microwaves and that sort of stuff. There's also annotating Cocoa, which is also, if you look at it, it's a blast from the past. It's very much a very dated data set in terms of the photos, but it has lots and lots of examples of very small hands. And as it happens, there basically aren't any tools in Cocoa. Why? Because no one actually, like photos, when someone takes a photo, what do we all do? We say, oh, someone's taking a photo. Let me freeze in place. And we're gonna capture this moment. So interestingly enough, actually image data sets are actually quite bad for certain types of things. However, they actually have lots and lots of small people. Because in reality, if you're gonna upload a video to a video sharing website, you aren't gonna have small people because you need to make sure that it's easy to see the people. And finally, we have a new version of sort of a drop-in replacement for 100 days of hands. And we have loads and loads of tool use, but we don't have lots of different people. So you can imagine that there are lots of different complementary things. And these are all third person. And the way that we get egocentric data is we also annotate the visor data set. It's a subset of the Epic Kitchens. And this comes with loads and loads of nice segments. And so it has lots and lots of tool use, and it's single person. And so these all have complementary challenges. And so there isn't actually a one beautiful data set that will solve all of our problems. But my hope is that by training on lots of different data sets, you can get stuff that covers this. And I know that in the people who do 3D reconstruction of hands, I know this is a common theme where you can't have one data set that solves everything. But by training on lots of them, you have a system that works quite robustly. And so I'd love it if someone says, hey, the annotations we have, yeah, they don't work for me. We've collected some new annotations, and we want to sort of push these together and want to train. And so my hope is that the annotations we collected are useful and people can extend them as well. And so we'd really welcome that. And if people want to work on this type of stuff, definitely reach out. So let me just show you what Visor is, just because this is something which is quite nice. It comes from Epic Kitchens. There is actually sound which goes with it, but I'm not going to play it in the interest of avoiding some sort of Zoom echo snafu. But we have these masks that were very, very nicely generated. So these are semantic segmentation masks. And these were annotated by really expert annotators. And so because of Dima's very, very excellent work on making great annotations and sort of a great ecosystem for Epic Kitchen, we have a lot of information that you can connect with hands. So we have information about hands contacting with objects, but this then gives you an entrance to the Epic Kitchen's ecosystem. And so this is if you're not using this, this is also quite nice because the segmentation masks are amazing. They're good enough that we actually told the annotators, please, can you stop making them so perfect, because they're really too perfect and it's taking too long to annotate. They're sort of pixel perfect. And we have sort of versions where we kind of interpolate between sparse frames. And so this is a great data set if you haven't been playing with it, because it lets you connect hands to the other Epic Kitchens information. So let me talk about the data set. So we have about 257,000 annotated images. These contain about 400,000 hands, 288,000 objects, and only about 20,000 second objects. So tool use, when people actually are using a tool to interact with something, is pretty rare. We have 65,000 grasp annotations. Annotating grasps, out of curiosity, raise your hand if you've ever annotated like grasp categories, like the sort of precision, prismatic. Raise your hand if you'd like to do it again. I see a head shaking. No, this is very painful and it's very challenging. And it is a very challenging task to annotate, so we don't have as many grasp annotations. But we have enough that you can actually learn from it and can evaluate it. Some of the features that we have is the data set is Creative Commons if it's from the internet, or it's similarly permissive if it's Visor. The other thing that we did was we blurred all the faces and we removed all the minors from the data set. And in general, I think as a community, and I know that in the hands community, you primarily gather with people. But if you're gathering data off the internet, I think it's very important that we don't have kids in our data sets, because what happens is kids end up on the internet and they don't have okay, they could be Creative Commons data, but they can't meaningfully really decide that this is a good idea. So I think we should be removing kids from our data, just even before we're legally required to, if you're in a country where that's not required. So this is something that I thought was pretty important. And we went through lots of processes for blurring faces. And these processes are actually really painful because finding kids in your data, you can't actually just run an age estimation system. First off, these systems are often horribly biased in the sense that they have different performance for different groups of people. And also there are lots of people where you can't actually see the faces. And the same thing is true with face detection. We find all sorts of very, even we used Amazon's recognition system that was quite good, but it would have all sorts of weird errors. The good news about this data is that we have great generalizations from it. So you train on this, it tends to work on lots of other stuff. So it's sort of, you could get sort of 0 shot, you could train on this and test on 100 days of HANDS, and you can get quite good results. Now, this is not too surprising because the statistics look quite different. But the other thing that we found is that you get poor generalization through this data set. So there's typically about a 7% AP gap, which suggests that current data sets can't actually, there's parts of the space that current data sets don't actually capture. So we have a system and we train this, and what we want to do is we want to have a method for detecting HANDS. And the method we use is a simple extension of mask RCNN. And basically what we do is we detect things using a standard mask RCNN, and then we add a whole bunch of extra heads. So we have detection, we have side, we have contact, touch, and grasp, and this sort of stuff. Now this seems very simple. I'd highly invite you to actually go and improve it. So this is just a basic system. This is the basic baseline. We didn't want to have a bunch of extra machine learning stuff that no one knew whether it worked or not, and it's something that you had to replicate and is going to cause you to tear your hair out. And how do we get interaction? Well, what we do is we actually take two bounding boxes, we take their ROI features, and we just predict whether they go together or not. And so you can basically build a n by n matrix of basically do these objects go together. And this system is actually very, very simple. And it's actually really the first thing you should have done, but it actually is extremely effective and much better than the previous systems we had. So let me just show you, like if you've played with our 100 days of HANDS detector, you've often found systems like this or outputs like this, where somehow the left hand is in contact with something across the screen. This doesn't make sense. You tear your hair out. You say, is it my data? Is it me? And no, it's the detector, because the way that it works doesn't actually train this correctly. So you have these issues. And the reality is that basically if you have a new version of the system, it actually does much better. So the F1 score in terms of associating things goes up by quite a bit. The good thing is that we actually have great generalization to Ego4D. And so if we take, this is just for context, these are the results, the APs that we're able to get on our own data set. If we move to Ego4D, hand detection remains around, it sort of goes up slightly because it's egocentric, so the hands are bigger. And if we're able to actually train on Ego4D and kind of self-train on your own outputs, we can actually produce slightly better results as well, which is quite nice. And so this works quite well on Ego4D. So we're hoping that if you try our system, you'll find good results. So what does this enable? Well, we can take the system and we can actually run it on different things. So here are examples of systems from Ego4D, outputs on Ego4D. And we can look at these are the most likely hands for various graphs. So non-precision palm, so your palm's in contact, non-precision fingers, and then you have power prismatic graph and precision circular. So you can go and find instances of grasps. You can also find instances of hands engaged in bimanual manipulation. And so you can find, for example, this hand tool object goes to hand. And so you can find examples like this. So people using hand tool object in their hands, and you can go search for different things. And so let me just show you one. So for example, there are things like hand tool object. So people are very busy and using two tools at the same time. And for any sort of configuration you're looking for, like hand object hand, you can find these. And so here's hand object hand, there's hand tool object. So the one on the top right is someone trying to, I guess, toss a salad or something like that. And so you can find these configurations, which I'm hoping will be useful for robotics people, because a lot of the bimanual manipulation is very interesting. So that's the idea in brief. We're currently looking for beta testers. So if you are interested, email me and Dan. So if you email Dan, the chance of a response goes up just because I get so many emails. I'm going to try to respond, but occasionally stuff slips in my inbox. But definitely email Dan, and she's sort of ready and waiting to send over code. So that's a system for finding hands. And I want to sort of close by showing a little bit about learning about interaction. And so I like to go from an input image, and once we've solved, especially hopefully using some of our 2D systems and using many people's great 3D systems, we've solved understanding what this man is doing when he's opening this dishwasher. I like to be able to predict this from an image. And the core idea that I've been trying to work on, and now my students are like, oh my gosh, David, please stop telling me about this. is that there are these classic point and click video games. Like for example, Myst, and raise your hand if you've ever played Myst. Yeah, okay, we got one. This is great. Raise your hand if you played any point and click video game where you click on stuff, you click on the door and it opens, like on like the internet. Yeah, I've got a few more. Okay, so you click on these things and you can imagine like these open world games. You can click on things and just stuff happens. So here's a video, you're clicking on this stuff. It's a puzzle game. You click on the button. You can do other stuff. So now they're walking across the river and they're going to click on this thing. They're going to open the door. I'd like to build a build system like this. And so Shane finally listened to his advisor and said, fine, we'll just get you to stop talking about this. And Shane did this great paper, which is going to appear on Friday. And he sort of made this work. And the basic idea is we're going to give it a query. We're going to ask, what can I do here? The idea here is like, given if I click on this, what can I do? And so we answer questions like extent or movability. So for example, the thing on the wall, I can't do anything. So I can't interact with it. I know that the chairs, the chair I can move with two hands and it's not, all the stuff on the chair is not rigid. You can combine objects. There are smaller objects that are, for example, rigid. And you can also estimate things like, for example, a door, you can estimate the articulation axis, and you can estimate that, for example, you can pull. And putting these all together along with depth information, you can sort of synthesize things. Like, for example, you can synthesize what the door looks like. And you can imagine that nowadays in a different workshop session, there's someone who's going to be able to fill in that door and imagine what's behind the door. And so this is sort of the dream. And the idea here is that this is basic information. And we want to take a system that goes from an image and provide you with rich information about what you can interact with. And so we eventually want to switch to video supervision, but for now, we have to first develop the system that once we solve all the video understanding problems, we can use. And so this motivates a couple of properties that we need our systems to do. So we don't want to have dense annotation. So the fact that I don't interact with something doesn't mean that I can't interact with it. So raise your hand if you have a cabinet in your kitchen that you basically open less than once a month. Like there's probably something with a bunch of junk in it. You're bringing it, you just like can't get rid of it, and you have something, you just don't open it. And there are lots of things in people's lives where you just don't interact with it. That doesn't mean it's not interactable. The emergency exit, hopefully we're not opening it, but that doesn't mean that it can't be opened. And so we need to be able to learn from a system which doesn't require dense negatives. We'd love to be able to use 3D, but not depend on it. So if we have to capture data where it always has RGBD, or has dense reconstructions, that's going to limit what data we can collect. And so this differs from a lot of past work, which is because there's a lot of great work in articulation. There is stuff about interaction from videos where we want to understand what's happening. Here we want to understand what could happen. There's lots of stuff in RGBD and in 3D understanding. And the key difference is here we're going to try to do things from RGB only. And so, of course, we have a data set. And so we have a new data set. And the idea here is that rather than watch videos and understand, we're going to actually get humans to label it and eventually switch over to watching and understanding. And the idea is basic. It's going to be a transformer. You take an input image, you take query points, and from there you can get an encoder. You have some positional encoders, and you have a decoder. And the idea here is you just predict a bunch of extra labels. And the idea is that, for example, given this purple point, you can then decode results like, I can move this with one hand, and it's sort of a free articulation, and it's not attached to anything. Let me just, in the interest of time, I'm just going to show you some qualitative results. Like if I click on this TV, I can get a segment, for example, and we can get segments via something like SAM. You can get a segment of like what would move with me if I picked up at this location. And you can get indications of where would I pick up with my hands. And I understand that it's not like rigidly attached to anything. If I click on this door, I can also estimate, for example, like the articulation axis. And just for comparison, one thing that we found is you can take methods that are trained on data sets that showcase interaction as it happens, and it doesn't work to indications of data sets where things could potentially happen. So we trained a system on, we took a system which was trained on a YouTube video data set of people interacting with objects, but the system completely fails, and this is on the left. This completely fails if you don't have people in it. So one thing we'll have to discover is how do we build systems that can understand interaction without needing a people to provide a cue. So the left was trained on internet videos where people do interact, and the right is trained with our system. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip the numbers. I'm just going to show you robotic stuff. And if you're interested in the numbers, there's a poster on Friday, and you can come and you can visit. In fact, I will be presenting the poster. So you can come and ask all the tough questions there. And one of the things we did is we're hoping that this could be useful for robotics. And so we tested on the Whirl data set, which is used for articulation in robotics. And we can take this image, and if you've been to CMU, you'll recognize that this is the CMU kitchen. So this is something we didn't train on. And you can click on this door, and you can estimate, for example, it's a rigid articulation, it's movable with one hand, and it's a rotation. And you can pull on this. And you can get an extent of this, and you can get an axis. And so putting this all together enables you to sort of do things like you can have a demo where you click on the object, and by putting all together things like, for example, if you get a depth map, you can then also render things. You can render that there's a translation. And if you know what the depth is, you can fit a surface neural, and then you can sort of pull this out, and this produces a nice sort of cute demo. And so this is, I'm hoping, is a world of possibilities. So, okay, in the end, what do I have for you? So what did you take away from this? Well, first off, there's tools for current hands in contact. I'd love it if people want to try this. So contact us. So send me an email, send Dan an email as well. And between the two of us, we will respond to you, and we'd love to see what things work. And we'd be especially interested in things that don't work, because I think what's exciting about computer vision is lots of things work, which means we have to focus harder on the things that don't work. And for future hands in contact, if you're interested, there's a little demo you can try, I guess, in between the break. So it's 3D OI, CVPR. So just give it a shot and let us know. And with that, I will take some questions in the remaining time, and I'll just let you watch some videos of people interacting with cats, which always are a favorite.